Hello world, it's Siraj. And supply chains. I know it doesn't sound like the sexiest word ever, but it is a very, very important industry that AI can be applied to and improved greatly. There's a huge potential there. Right, so like I said, the supply chain is that network between a company and its suppliers to produce and distribute a specific product. And the supply chain represents the steps it takes to get that product to the consumer. So we can see this nice little infographic. We have the start, which is a factory, and this person or robot then forecasts, ideally using AI. Right now it's done mostly using humans. It forecasts the demand. How many people are going to want this product? And based on that forecast, they will create enough product from raw material to meet that demand. And then they're going to allocate all of that onto these trucks. They're going to optimize the routes that these trucks take to get to the consumer. They're going to assort all of those finished products in those boxes in the distribution factory and then send them to the retail center. And hopefully more customers buy the product. There is actually profit, right? Hopefully there is profit after this giant process. And it's a very long and complicated process to go through, right? I mean, there's so many middlemen here. But the problem is that what if the consumer doesn't like it, right? Ideally, you want to cut your losses as a business. And right now, there are people, consulting firms, agencies that companies hire to do this, and they're very, very expensive. Companies lose a lot of money due to the supply chain. And if you, as a small startup, can save any company even 5% on their transportation costs because you're using AI to optimize the ideal time that they should send this shipment, factoring in the weather conditions, factoring in consumer demand, factoring in whatever it is. If you can show to them that you can do that, not only is that a big deal, you will get paid so much money. There is so much money to be made in the supply chain, okay? I've been researching this. There's a lot of money. Seriously, this AI for Business series is me basically being like, how can AI be applied to this? Oh my God, what am I doing with my life? But anyway. But the problem with supply chains, and there is a big problem, is that there are these silos, right? There are silos. It's not easy to just say, I'm going to make an AI startup. Give me your supply chain. Like it's like one big data set. It's not always. You know, there are different companies that deal with all these things that require armies of expensive planners. And they usually run complex engines at each step of the process and at each node in the supply network. So they're missing out on these huge opportunities because they're locally optimized for their own little silo. But if someone could get an overhead view of all of the data, you could optimize the F out of everything, which is awesome, right? So that's what we want to do. We want to get that huge end-to-end data set of the entire supply chain. And so if we look at, people were surveyed, companies were surveyed what the most costly outcomes were for their supply chains. And most people said margin erosion. And the second one was sudden demand change, which is also a big one, right? So if suddenly people don't want the product, or suddenly, the margin has eroded, or whatever it is, which I assume is like the product margin. Like, let's say the cost of the raw materials went up for some reason, like oil, for example, because of political reasons or whatever, what have you. But that's a huge deal as well. And you can predict all of these things. You can predict that a product is going to fail. You can predict that there's going to be a disruption in the product flow. All of this, if you have sufficient data, you can predict these things. This is a superpower. And think about it. Most of these companies, they don't know that anything about this. You are literally watching a video on supply chain applied to AI. So there's a lot of opportunity in this space. So supply chains have a lot of data, and it's all sorts of data. It's transactional data, it's time phase data, it's GPS mapping, numbers, strings, text, dates. There's a lot. And we have to regularize all this data so it's in the same numerical format. And then we could feed it to a machine learning model. But they've got so much data.